Building ego as a response to trauma and PTSD. So to start off, we'll recap a little bit. What is an ego? It has two parts. There's an identity. Well, and this could be considered, by the way, a traumatic event, right? So there's a pattern. That's what an identity is. It's a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And our environment, things outside of our control, can disrupt our pattern, which just happened, right? Here we were, looked like, we had a pattern going on. And Microsoft, in its infinite wisdom, glitch, and for some reason, right, it just vanishes. The pattern disappears. Now, when we are completely identified, so we have a pattern, and the pattern consists of thinking, feeling, and the feelings generally correlate with the thoughts, speaking, hopefully that has something to do with what we're thinking and feeling, and doing, again, hopefully there's a congruency there. So we have thoughts, feelings, words, actions, and then a way of being, and that includes our physical presence. So now we have identity, we have a pattern. The ego says, that's me. I am this thought, this feeling, this action, this word, this way of being. That's me. And usually the ego has a very easy formula for doing so. How do you know that's me, ego? Well, because I remember, meaning I put the pattern together again. I remember, I reassemble the pattern that was there just a moment ago, and it's the same pattern, so it must be me, right? I looked in the mirror, I saw that face, I see it again, right? That curve, that's me. How do I know? Because I saw it before. I look in my mind, I see a thought. Is that me? Yes, it's me. Why? Well, I was thinking that same thought yesterday and the day before that. And even if the specific thought was the same, I think in this way, right? I think complaining thoughts. How do I know that's me? Well, it's another complaining thought. Or how do I know that's me? It's another exuberant thought without awareness of the cost, right? Exuberance, like, oh, that'll be great, but oh, then we have to pay for it, right? I do exuberant patterns, or I do this, I do that. The I simply identifies, attaches itself to a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that is referenced from the memory, from the past. Right? I always do this, I always think this, I always feel this, I'm thinking it now, so it's me. I always look like this, I'm looking that way now, that's me. So that's the identity, that's the ego. And the purpose of an ego is to hold subroutines. 99% of everything that's going on about our identity is semi-conscious, unconscious, or default. The blood is flowing by default, the kidney is doing this by default, the liver is doing that by default, the muscles are doing this by default, even the mouth is, I think thoughts, the mouth does that by default. It's not, can I control 50 different muscles to say that word? No, it just happens automatically, right? So the ego is the umbrella, the operating system that does most things automatically. And what this does is it frees up bandwidth, right? The fact that all those 99% of things are done on autopilot frees up bandwidth to consider, to evaluate one thing, one new thought, one new possibility, and decide what to do with it. I don't like that. Why? Because it's inconsistent with what I've been thinking. Now, this refers to a self-referential way of maintaining the ego. I am this way because I was this way, and I was this way because my parents were that way, and they were that way because that's the way things were done, and so that's why I'm this way. That's called a self-referential pattern. There's an endless loop. It'll go round and round. There's no way out because you were the way you were because you were the way you were. So you've got a pattern, a default pattern, and that's referenced by the past, that's referencing itself as its only kind of basis for existence. Then you have other reference patterns. For example, an ideal, right? So over here you have the ideal, a more beautiful, a more true, a more perfect world. And there's a gap. There's always a gap between the ideal and the I, the identity, right? Who we are is not perfect, right? The more perfect, the more true, the more beautiful world exists as an ideal out there. And there's a gap. That gap can be measured by frustration, disappointment, anticipation, excitement, motivation, this hopelessness, I'm never going to get there. But the gap has an impact. Maybe we turn away from it. Like, I don't want to deal with this gap. It's so far. I'm here and the ideal is there. But when we reference something outside of ourself that's more beautiful, more true, more good, and ideal, then we can evaluate new information, not based on, is that the way I always do things, but is that closer or further away from my ideal? And this can start to create a little chaos, because if I'm still thinking, if I'm still feeling, doing and being and saying these things, but I'm starting to think this new thing, I'm moving closer to my ideal over here. Like, yes, I always complain, but in my ideal world, in a more beautiful world, I praise. But I complain. I complained yesterday, I complained. I don't praise, says the ego, referencing the past. I am a complainer, right? But in the ideal world, I might be a praiser. Now, why? Well, what if we lived in a world where everyone praised things? Would it be a better world? You have to evaluate what is better, what is more beautiful. You see, not necessarily. Maybe it would be best if it was both, right? Maybe we criticize the things that are, really ready for an update, and then don't just criticize them, but take action and change them. And then we praise the majority of things that are okay and a step forward, and we acknowledge all that progress. Maybe that's the best protocol. We have to decide what is the ideal. But if an identity, if a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being references an ideal, it will be constantly updating itself. If it references itself, it will be constantly reinforcing itself, right? Now, what trauma is a collision between a giant and dense pattern of energy and an ego, right? So we have this large pattern. You can visualize it as a bowling ball and a pinball. So the ego, the I identity, our pattern of energy, is a pinball. and a bowling ball is coming along, and they collide, right? The ego isn't paying attention, the bowling ball isn't paying attention or isn't interested in changing its trajectory. They collide. And what happens when a large mass of energy collides with a small mass of energy? The pinball goes flying. The bowling ball, they collide, pinball shoots off in a completely different pattern, right? The pinball, the ball, the ego has been going along, doing its pattern, and the bowling ball has been going along doing its pattern, and they meet, and poof, right? The pinball goes flying. The bowling ball continues its original pattern, and this is a traumatic event for the ego. What trauma means is a violent, sudden disruption of our identity, of our pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. I'm driving in my car, going along at 50 miles an hour. Someone swerves in, there's a collision. I'm no longer going at 50 miles an hour. I'm no longer thinking the same thought. I'm no longer feeling the feeling I had before. I'm no longer doing any of what I was doing. My identity has been shattered. My identity has been shattered. And I do not know who I am in the new identity. Or I find I do know who I am and it's completely different. There's a schism, there's a gap between the old pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being and the new pattern. I was cheerful, now I'm terrified. I was listening to the radio, now the radio speakers are all over the highway. I was feeling, this, now I'm feeling, this. I was thinking about my birthday party, now I'm thinking, will another car hit me while I'm laying here? And it all happened so suddenly that I can't integrate. The identity has been shattered. And at this point, the ego, the I, must either create a new pattern and start defining a new pattern, or it will be created for them externally. Or what happens with PTSD is it's so shattering and terrifying for the ego that the ego holds tightly to the most traumatic moment of its life, to the very moment of the shattering, and just puts that on autopilot, right, or on auto loop. Like, I'm in the floor, I'm crashing. I'm in the floor, I'm crashing. I'm in the floor, I'm crashing. And so we repeat the worst possible moment in the worst possible way to hold on to a pattern, right, that happened to me, a traumatic event. Now I define myself. I identify as a traumatized person. That is my new identity, right? And I'm scared to leave that really solid pattern in case another traumatic event hits me that I don't fully understand. So I'm just holding on. The I doesn't want to die. The I doesn't want to lose control. And one way to hold on to something very tightly is to repeat the traumatic experience in the body. So the problem, the crisis for the ego, for the I, when we have experienced repeated, overwhelming traumas that we feel like we just can't do anything about. A forest fire is a good example. Like idiots in the next town, they keep lighting these forest fires every single time it happens. 2 or 3 of my relatives die. The farm is scorched. We lose the crop. We lose the farm. It takes 10 years to rebuild, and then some idiot lights a fire, and it just keeps happening. And this really causes us to question, is it worth living? Should we do anything? Now, the ego defaults to the past, right? So it wants what it tries to do, like if I'm an athlete and my identity is shattered, it says, okay, I have to go back to being an athlete. Okay, that's default mode for the ego, to recreate the old pattern. But I have no legs. It's a problem, right? I can't do it. I don't know who I am without that pattern. That's true. The ego doesn't. It's too overwhelming to try and figure out what to do with this. That may also be true, right? If you haven't learned to think, if you haven't learned to create worst-case scenarios and respond and plan A, B, and C, your old identity didn't include that. So your new identity, you now need to think of A, B, and C in worst-case scenarios, and you can't do it. So I just want to go back to the past, but the past doesn't exist. I just want to go back to the past. It doesn't exist. So this is a crisis. This also, depression, a loop. I want to go back to the past. It's hopeless. I want to go to the past. It's hopeless. Depression, right? It's going round and round in a loop. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't flow. It doesn't create. So this is the crisis of someone with a traumatized identity, someone with PTSD or complex PTSD. A series of things have happened. You cannot go back to the past. You're replaying horrific events, and by definition, the I is incapable of encountering a trauma like that and succeeding. Right? If you've been in a few car accidents and totaled a few cars, you recognize, you have to grasp that my ego cannot solve the problems of a car accident. I may die. I may lose one arm. The next time I may lose another arm. I could lose my eyes. I could lose all kinds of things. I could lose my confidence. Confidence comes from success. So if you're repeatedly failing, you lose your confidence. If you lose your confidence, that's a part of your identity. Your pattern of thinking and feeling is confidence. Based on what? Success. But I'm failing. And I'm failing. I've lost my confidence. Okay, so I have identity. I have a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that has no confidence. So how do you do anything with that? You're stuck, right? Because you don't take action until you have some degree of confidence that you're not going to die with the next step. Otherwise, you become paralyzed physiologically or psychologically. I'm not going to move. I don't know. Every time I move out there, I just get whacked, right? So this is the crisis of ego. It is a crisis of identity, and it leaves us paralyzed, terrified, unable to face, because we know that if we go head-to-head with the bowling ball, we're the one that goes flying based on the law of mass. We know that. We've experienced it. We don't want to go flying again. But we also know the bowling ball is in our way, right? This is what I want to be. The bowling ball doesn't care, right? You know, a teenager wants to dress like this, do this, like that. Mom and dad doesn't care, right? Physical violence, shame, discipline, no allowance, you know, police, whatever the method is, it's like, I want to do this. This is who I want to be. And the bowling ball says no. A giant says no, right? A large truck says no. You're not driving in that way. Even if it's your lane. I happen to be drunk. I'm driving in your lane. If you don't get out of your lane, you are dead. And that is the traumatic event. This is a crisis. This is PTSD. This is trauma. This is a dark forest out of which you may or may not emerge. You may die, or worse, just be paralyzed for life, right? Here you are. So what I want to suggest is that there are a lot of bowling balls in the world. Your government, if you don't do this and this, will take your house, we'll arrest you. If you do this and this and this, even if you think it's the right idea, look, the science says this, think of all of the people whose homes and families were destroyed for smoking marijuana. 5-year-old boy, one day his father doesn't come home because he smoked a joint. Now you may say this is absurd. In a free country, people do not have the right to put plants in their own body. See, but it doesn't matter. Your father is gone. Because your father is gone, the income is gone. Right? Because the income is gone, your house is gone. Because your house is gone, your safety is gone. All because a fucked up authority figure didn't know what they didn't know, or they did know and they didn't care. There are a lot of large objects in the world that are sociopathic, meaning they either enjoy cruelty or they really don't care about the impact they have as much as they care about the agenda that they have. There are a lot of large sociopathic objects in the world. And if you collide with a large object as a small object, you will go flying. That's the law of mass. It's not the law of right and wrong. It's not the law of character. It's not the law of empathy. It's not the law of ethics. It's the law of mass. A large object and a small object collide, and even if the large object is wrong, sociopathic, evil, out of date, ignorant, stupid, cruel, a fool, self-destructive, even if the bowling ball is about to go over a cliff and you're going to safety, if you hit the bowling ball dead on, you bounce back over the cliff and the bowling ball goes over the cliff as well. It is dumb, right? But it's the law of mass. There are many, many large objects that if you do not get out of their way, will traumatize you. That's the law of mass. Now, many of these objects are mislabeled. Like, your government is not your friend if you're a 6-year-old and your father likes smoking marijuana in the 80s. It's not your friend. Your government is the biggest threat to your well-being, your sense of self-esteem, your sense of safety. Your government is your enemy in that situation, in that context. But you haven't been taught that. You've been taught that, your tax dollars have been forcibly taken from you, and let's be real, right? Let's be real. If you don't pay your taxes, a lien gets put on the wages and they will be taken. If you fight that, you may be also arrested. Your house will be taken, right? So let's be very clear. These resources are taken under penalty of imprisonment, family trauma, theft, humiliation, right? And sometimes violence, right? So your money is taken from you, but it's taken under the promise that your government will do the right thing for its people, right? The money is supposedly to be spent for your benefit. But if you spend a little bit of time looking at the pros and cons of any given policy in government, you realize that every government action has winners and losers, right? A government cuts your school budget to pay down the deficit, right? So people with government bonds have a benefit. The credit rating in the country has a benefit, but your school has a deficit. Right? There's an up and a down, right? And sociopathic governments try to benefit the most powerful in a collusion to abuse minorities and the most marginalized people who will not donate and will not bribe politicians and get them elected. And so the elected official will not care for the most vulnerable people in the country, right? So there's a sociopathic element in government, but you're not told that in school. You're told that other governments are terrible. Our government is the right. There's also a sociopathic element in parents. Oh, that fucking baby is screaming its head off in a traumatic state again. Well, I don't want to learn about trauma. Fuck that, right? I don't want to learn about PTSD. Fuck that. I don't want to deal with that kid again. It takes another 30 minutes to calm him down. I need a break. I need a drink. I need a cigarette. Want to have a quick fuck with the neighbor. So, get the fuck out of here, kid. We'll just throw a pillow over you, put some alcohol in you, do something, or just put you in the back room. Well, you may develop complex PTSD in that protocol. That may damage you for life as an infant in a culture that knows how to traumatize its children but does not know how to heal PTSD in any reliable manner. So 30 minutes of sociopathic self-indulgence or coping mechanism or narcissism or stupidity on the part of your parents gives you a problem for life, right? You make less money, you die earlier, you get sicker because you've got complex PTSD, right? But your parents, they got a drink and a cigarette for 30 minutes, right? It's mind-numbingly idiotic, but it is also happening all the time. Giants knock the little one on a new trajectory that has nothing to do with their well-being and has everything to do with expedience. And you weren't taught this, and so you don't know how to respond to this. Right? Mom loves you. That's obfuscation in this context, right? That was not a loving act, right? After a quick fuck, after a few drinks, after a cigarette, after calming down, then mom may be loving. Then, right? After you've developed complex PTSD, she may be in a good mood, right? But that was a cruel act, right? And it's cruel to remain traumatically illiterate as a culture. And that's what we're doing, right? So this is a collision of pinballs and bowling balls in a traumatic protocol all over the place. People's lives destroyed. And when the I has had its patterns shattered too many times, it actually fears. It becomes the one who is afraid of reestablishing its own pattern, its own identity, because to do so is to collide with a giant and fail and lose, right? So this is the state that many of us find ourselves in as vulnerable, traumatized, uncertain, hopeless, helpless, lacking in confidence eyes that don't really know what our pattern should be because it's defined by what do I have to do, what do I have to say, what do I have to feel, what do I have to think so that I won't get beaten up again and again and again. And so the identity becomes outer referenced, out of fear, in a freeze flight protocol. Okay, someone's angry with me, I'll give them what they want. It doesn't matter if it's right. I just don't want to be beaten up again, right? Maybe they won't beat me up if I just give them everything that I have, right? A shattered, weak ego, a shattered, weak I, who becomes frightened of existing because there's no way to deal with all of this, this violation, this trauma. So we know what trauma is. We know what the I is. We know why and how the I becomes traumatized and develops PTSD. The question is what to do about it, right? And it is important to acknowledge that the high levels of ignorance combined with the high levels of sociopathic behavior, sociopathic identities and abuse of power in the world, makes it such that many egos will be unsuccessful at ever finding an I, identity, a pattern, that can navigate these large sociopathic elements and maintain coherence. Now, what will happen in many cases, if you can't beat them, join them. Might makes right in the reptilian operating system of fight, flight, freeze, and the law of mass. Might makes right. In other words, when you're dealing with reptiles in human bodies, with the sociopathic operating system, whoever has the power to win the war is the right one, because they rewrite history, and they always write it that they're the right one, even if it's bullshit. Right? They ignore their many shortcomings. They ignore the many benefits of the defeated. They rewrite the history, and so might makes right. So one protocol, and it's quite common, is that the shattered, frightened ego will join the abuser, becoming an abuser. This is one reason intergenerational abuse happens. My dad beat me. I couldn't do anything about it, so I just beat my child. I identify with the stronger party, which is the abuser, which is the oppressor, right? They killed all my family, so I joined the army of the people that killed us, and we now go and kill other people. But at least I'm solid. I have a solid identity. And it is important to understand that the drive for survival is the primary drive for the traumatized ego, survival. And it is also important to understand that if you've just been repeatedly destroyed as identity, as a pattern, by a larger pattern, the best logic is to adopt the stronger pattern. I'll just become what hit me. And so this is the way all human memes spread in a viral nature. If I cannot defend my innocence against abuse and feel crushed, that will be too terrifying for the ego, so I will dissociate from myself, the broken pattern, and I will associate and identify with the larger, stronger pattern of the abuser, of the oppressor, and I will become my enemy, trusting that since my enemy survived against me, I will survive against others, and the I, the ego, will be solid. So this is a probability, meaning in a traumatically illiterate cult that is predominantly sociopathic, in that the majority of people, the majority of the time, are not turning their attention in the country or the world to who is the most vulnerable and needy and responding to those vulnerabilities and needs, but are instead saying who can get me more of what I want, and colluding and engaging with those who have more power, rank, and resources, often at the expense of the most vulnerable. right? That is sociopathic behavior. I'm not going to engage with because you need something from me. You, I am going to engage with because I want to take something from you. That's sociopathic. Empathic is, you're in a lot more pain than I am. Let me try and be helpful. That's empathic, right? So we are in a predominantly, at least 60% of all the behavior in our cult is sociopathic. How can I get more and more from me, regardless of how it affects the most vulnerable in our midst? Well, colluding with other sociopaths that have a lot of mass, colluding with the majority is an effective way to stabilize trauma, right? So we can become an abuser. We can become and join that which shattered us, right? A company destroys our company just because it was bigger, had better attorneys, but now it may offer to hire the best people from our company. And, well, they beat us. We don't exist. We'll go work for the aggressor and hopefully win, right? Don't be part of the losing side, be part of the winning side, says the sociopath. And so these are different operating systems, the empathic operating system, the sociopathic operating system, and the rational operating system, can go either way. Now, how do you start rebuilding? How do you start rebuilding identity after trauma other than just being paralyzed? And that's what we'll look at briefly here. The first thing that you want to do is you want to accumulate resources that help you to survive. And you may do this as a prostitute. A prostitute is anyone who is doing things for money or resources for security, rather than because they believe in them, they want to do them, they admire them, they like them, right? If your primary is who's going to pay me the most, and I don't really like that boss, I don't really agree with the company, I think the products are shit, but they'll pay me more than the other, that's a 100% prostitute, right? Prostitute just means you're doing something for the money. Now, of course, in the case of sex, I don't want to have sex with you, I don't want to do this, I don't like you, I don't respect you, but I'm doing it for the money, right? That's a sexual prostitute. But a mental prostitute, I don't agree with your thoughts, I don't agree with that, but I'm going to read your book because I'm a narrator. I hate this book, but I'm going to read it for the money, right? So, if necessary, you become a prostitute to gather resources, to be able to begin to rebuild your identity with those resources. Every pattern needs energy to sustain it, or it collapses, right? So you may have to work for the enemy pattern in order to secure resources to start being able to invest in your pattern, right? And many do, right? That's the capitalist model. You need to gather resources to survive. You need to gather resources to be secure in that survival. You need to gather resources for love and belonging. These are your first three human needs: to survive, to be secure, to have love and belonging. You need to do that. And you need to generally, if you're in a very weakened state, do that within the operating system, within the protocol, within the system that is around you, the large one, the cult, right? We have jobs flipping burgers. Yeah, but I'd like to help people. Well, if you think flipping burgers helps people, have a go. We have jobs telemarketing. Well, I want to help people. This product doesn't seem to be worth marketing. Well, that's up to you. That's the job that's available, right? And so there's There's a process of accumulating resources that can bring you to a point where you may have the courage to adopt a new identity, a new pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that's about you, about your version of the world. So we'll pause here and come back and continue. Now, in part 2 of this conversation, let's explore the moments, the time frame right after a traumatic experience, and how to partner with the I, with the ego, to rebuild a better pattern, a more intelligent pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being than might otherwise be the case. Now, the first thing that we need to know is that right after a traumatic event, the ego's need for certainty is higher than for almost anything else. Now, what does this mean? This means that right after a traumatic event, someone may go back to their family of origin, knowing full well that it is dysfunctional, sick, abusive, a very unhealthy environment, but also knowing that it is family or familiar or predictable, that it provides high levels of certainty. Someone being rejected. Now, it's important to understand in romantic relationships, you require 2 or more people, and the identity, the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, the third energy, which is the relationship that emerges in the interference pattern between 2 people's thoughts, feelings, actions, etc., is dependent on both people being there in the relationship. So there is a new pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being in any meaningful relationship. A new pattern forms. And that form requires the other person to participate. It's just like a tennis game. Every person you play tennis with, if you're even marginally intelligent, will elicit a different response. Like the last player always hit the ball over there. So if you're out of touch, you may go and try and hit empty air where the last person would have hit the ball. But if you're, even moderately good at tennis, if the new person you're playing with hits the ball at a different speed, at a different angle, with a different strategy, you respond to them. In other words, to play tennis, you play a different game. You develop a different identity than you do with any other person you play tennis with. And a relationship is tennis mentally, emotionally, sexually, dietarily. You will eat differently. You will speak differently. You will feel differently. You'll have sex differently. Right? You'll have a different energy level. You'll talk about different things for different amounts of time with every person you're in a relay, a relationship of energy with. And this is why the ending of a relay, of a relationship, is a traumatic event for the ego. Because as soon as the other person disappears from the probability field, from the actuality field, the part of us that is responding to them as they were, as they are, the I wants to keep up the act. Why? Because the I is attached to stability, right? The I at a personal level is a fractal microcosm of the I at a cultural level, you can think of the ego as the government. And however ridiculous, however inefficient, however corrupt, however hypocritical, however insane a government is, they're generally good at continuing to be insane, hypocritical, wasteful, corrupt, etc., right? So the I is trying to maintain its identity, however corrupt, however absurd. Now, people looking at us, of course, on the outside might say, I mean, if they would just stop being so sarcastic, they could have all the love they want. But despite desperately wanting love, they also seem to desperately desire to be sarcastic at the most sensitive moments in a way that destroys. And you'd say, well, why does that person keep doing the identity? Why don't they let go of the habit, of the pattern, and get a different result? Well, the I's job is to cling to something that it defines itself by. The ego's job is to say, I am this pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And on the other side of that is the great unknown. As soon as this pattern disappears and I don't know who I am, I don't know what's coming next. I'm out of control. Now, in a traumatically illiterate culture, all egos are traumatized. All egos are terrified. If I don't stay the richest person in the world, someone else will take my identity. And who will I be then, right? If I don't keep having sex, every 6 months, who would I be then? If I don't eat this donut that I've been eating for 30 years, who would I be then, right? Who knows? But the greatest fear of the traumatized culture, the traumatized government, the traumatized ego, the traumatized church, any identity, their greatest fear is of not existing. And their greatest default strategy is to keep doing whatever they've been doing as the best predictor that things will stay roughly the same and they won't face the unknown, because in the unknown lies death and salvation. But the traumatized ego, the traumatized government, the traumatized country, the traumatized individual, is not interested in salvation. They're just interested in avoiding death. So they have a blanket boycott on being out of control, which leads to a blanket boycott against change, which could lead to something new, something unknown. And so the person who's left with identity, a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing after a relationship partner leaves, who am I now, right? And so the effort is to deny first, like, no, I'm still going to be this person. I'm still going to do this. I'm still going to do that. But slowly the identity collapses. You can't say, tell me more to someone who isn't there. So that bit of it collapses. You can't say, I'll have another one, thank you, if they're not offering, right? So that bit collapses. And so as the pattern developed in a rapport with a particular group or person collapses, one is faced with the unknown, one is faced with the death of identity, the death of a pattern. And this is outrageous. How could someone do this to us, destroy who we are? We can no longer be this, and this, because they're not hitting the ball back. And so this usually results in, as an all dying process. So first is denial. No, they'll be back crawling on their knees, or it wasn't that bad. I'm sure they'll forgive me, or whatever it is. So this is the denial process. Then there's the bargaining process, right? You better come back or I'm never going to see you again, blah, blah, blah. You have the bargaining process. And if that doesn't work, then it's depressing. what am I going to do? They're not even responding to my worst curses and this and that. There's the bargaining. Then, there's anger, of course. How could they? You did this to me, and all that, and depression, and eventually there's acceptance, and eventually there's change, meaning the field of the relationship collapses. We don't know who we are. It's very uncertain and unstabilizing for a bit. The routine is unstable. And then we find, lo and behold, there's another person, a new group, a new belief system, a new something that offers the hope of stability of this back and forth. And then we extend our pattern out again, and it's different, whatever it is, right? A new field, a new probability field emerges, and we know who we are again, right? Now we found a new pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, and then that collapses. And so, but it's important to understand that this is a terribly traumatic experience for the I, particularly a traumatized ego, which most of us are. So we have different defenses against this. In the need for certainty, one of the first defenses is I'm not going to be in a relationship. Nobody's going to do that to me again, right? I'm just not going to be in a relationship at all. Nope. Oh, sure, you're interested in being in a relationship, but I know your plan. Once I've got all my nice routine and then off you go. Fuck that, right? No. Nobody is going to get close to me in such a way that I would change anything, and that way I will stay stable. They come, they go, and so I'm going to maintain an independent identity. And I'm not going to let anyone think, oh, that person's lovely and all that, but I would have to dance 30% faster. I see them on the dance floor, but they're dancing at this speed and I'm dancing at this speed, and I'm not changing my dance. I'm going to continue dancing at this speed, and they, of course, often doing the same thing as wounded egos do, are going to continue doing this, and so we're just not going to connect because I'm going to stick to my identity. I finally found something that I've cobbled together that generally holds up, and I'm just not going to change it. But so that's a defense. I'm not going to need anyone. I'm not going to change and stuff like that. It tends to be a bit more stagnant. But remember that the goal of the traumatized ego is stability and certainty. Now, this is also why it's very common to develop PTSD, which is basically a predictable nightmare of reliving the worst event possible. And this is why an ego will pick such a traumatic event to relive, because the traumatic identity, this traumatic pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, is what's left over after the original pattern has been shattered by the traumatic event. So there's an extreme amount of you look at something like Stockholm syndrome. Someone falls in love with their captor. First, they will try to escape. First, they will wait to be rescued. But when it is clear that their captor has all of the power and all the control, the traumatized ego, feeling helpless and vulnerable, feels devastated. I don't know what's going to happen next. It's because of the captor. I don't want to do this, but I have to do this. I said I was going to escape, but I failed. I said I wasn't going to eat, but now I'm eating, right? And so it's all my captors have the most stable pattern of anything around me. Everything about me, I don't know what time it is, I don't know what this, but they know what time it is. They've got a plan. And their plan is working for them. My plan is not working. My plan was to be out at the library then and seeing my kids, but I'm in a dark hole. Their plan was to put me in a dark hole, and That's where I am. And so the ego need for certainty can pivot from a pleasurable, positive, creative agenda that is failing repeatedly to a destructive or painful agenda that is providing predictability, right? And you can see this, why do so many people live quiet lives of desperation? If we look at another area of life, they just show up doing the same fucking thing day after fucking day, thinking the same thoughts, watching the same crappy TV shows. Why do they do it? Why isn't there an uprising, a shift in the pattern towards something that's 10x in interest and creativity? Why not play a violin on the street today? No, it's rocking the boat. It's disrupting the equilibrium, the familiarity, the family in the pattern. So we're not going to do it. We're going to fear the unknown. So fear of the unknown is one of the greatest of all human fears, if not the greatest fear. And it is because within the unknown lies all potential traumatic events and the death of the ego. Right? And so certainty is intended not to feel good, but to protect against the terror of the unknown. Now, if you understand that, you will understand why so many people are reluctant to give up any of their grip. Like, could you let go just a bit of your despair, a bit of your hopelessness, a bit of your suicidal tendency? Nope. That's the way I am. And I'm going to hold on to it tightly. Could you change a bit of your life that makes you feel so miserable? No, absolutely not. I've done that. It didn't work out. I didn't have control. I've got control of this, and I'm not going to let it go. So if you understand, my ego, after a traumatic event, desperately wants something to hold on to. The most stable thing that is definitely there is the traumatic event. So that's the default. The ego may develop a traumatized identity simply because it's solid. No matter where I am, I can remember the traumatic identity. But if I'm feeling joyful, the traumatic event can knock me out of joy in a moment. So how can we build identity, a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that is more constructive and more pleasant, for example, than reliving the traumatic event? Well, the first level of certainty is, can I avoid it again? Right? So that is the first question. Do I have a means to avoid the traumatic event? And the first answer is no, you don't, right? Meaning there isn't a single ego that saw the truck about to crash into them and said, of course I want to survive, and if I just turned right, I wouldn't hit the truck. And said, well, I'm not going to do that, right? So the very fact that you have collided with a bowling ball as a pinball and been sent flying means, by definition, that your old pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being did not accurately predict that and couldn't avoid it and was traumatized, right? So your old pattern couldn't navigate that territory. Now, the fact that you are incapacitated, maybe laying across the street in bits and pieces, uncertain if you're going to live, does not increase that capacity. It means you absolutely do not know how to survive that situation again. And you may not even live, right? So that's the reality. Your old pattern could not protect you from the traumatic event, or it would have. But it didn't. So this is one of the most upsetting things to grasp as a trauma survivor. I don't know what I did wrong, but like, let's, you think of like a car accident. You think, okay, I was a good driver, or I wasn't, or I have whatever skill I have. But if I'm a crappy driver, presumably I'm a crappy driver because, I have attention deficit disorder. Okay, so every time I'm about to look in the mirror and then a text comes in or something like, well, I've still got attention deficit disorder. So why wouldn't I make a mistake in the future and end up dead or even worse, right? So you realize, and I don't know how to stop attention deficit disorder. I haven't learned that skill. Can it be stopped? Is anyone? I don't know, right? It's a big unknown. Could I turn off my phone when I'm driving? Yeah, I could probably do that. You have to figure out how to stop the collision with the traumatic event, which if it has happened, right, the world tends to be circular, tends to be spiral in nature. So if you've been hit by a car in your course of your normal lifestyle, statistically speaking, there is a probability, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100, that you are going to be hit again in a similar way, or you're going to hit someone else. So how can you stop that statistic? Right? Well, what about buses? Well, you have to look up the statistic. If I took the bus to work rather than do this, but my work isn't anywhere near a bus stop, so then I would have another problem, and I couldn't survive because I wouldn't have enough money, because I'm not taking cars, because I'm now terrified of cars. So you have to grasp that there is a problem that your ego didn't solve before and now is questioning, can I solve it? And you've got to solve that problem. Now, understanding that you didn't and perhaps couldn't solve the last problem, you're going to need help. You're going to need help by someone who may know more than you do, but then are they going to help you in a sociopathic culture? Do you have someone that you can ask for help? And if you ask, will they help you, right? So these are equations that your ego needs to solve. Now, there is another way, of course, and this is where the protection of religion and faith comes in, that this is all part of a divine plan. Right? My child was molested, my wife left me, my stockbroker gave me bad advice so they could increase their commissions. So I don't have any money, I don't have a wife, I have a traumatized child, and this is all part of a divine plan. And then I'm evicted because I don't have the money to pay the bill, and that's part of the divine plan. And then because it's so, anxiety producing and shaming to be out on the street, then I become a drug addict, part of the divine plan. And then my life is shortened, and now I've got some virus injected, and that's part of the divine plan. But if you believe that, whatever it is that you're doing is all part of, God's plan, and, God's looking out for you, there is a protection. Like, you don't have to solve this. And it's a great relief to just say, well, I believe in God, and God's taken care of me so far. I am what I am. The world is what it is. I'm still here. Let's be grateful. I mean, there are still trees to be grateful for. The sun still came up this morning. I can be grateful for that. Now, that is one path around this, to basically enter a state of gratitude, grace, trust, and acceptance of what is, do one's best, fail however much one fails while doing one's best, and say, well, I'm sure God knows what they're doing with all that. And if God wants me to fail repeatedly, maybe I'll consult him after my death, right? So that's a way, right? Now my second child has been raped. My third one is in prison. I just keep serving, serving the Lord. It is curious, of course, how exactly raping children is so essential. I mean, but no, we're not going to question the authority figure. And the same is true with government. They sent my first son off to war. They arrested my second one for managing stress. Like, they sent them to a school. They said, go to this school. They were humiliated and bullied at school, so they started taking drugs to avoid the humiliation and escape the shame. And then they were arrested, and great amounts of taxpayer money is now spent not to prevent bullying, but to lock them up in jail. And it might seem reasonable to think that there could be a better plan, but it's just the way it is. The government had to do it, right? The government had to prioritize this and that, and couldn't possibly, increase the psychological literacy of students or teachers, right? The poor government wouldn't have enough money, right? So I'll just keep, sacrificing the children that I love to my cult and its various altars and protocols and whatever the results are, and it's just the way it is, right? And that is a very peaceful way to accept what is, to have faith that what is perhaps the best that could be, all part of some plan, and then you don't have to solve any of this. You just day by day. Well, there's another this, another that, another rip-off, another this. And, well, I'm still here. So that is an approach. And it is a better approach. This is, the irony. It is a better approach than grasping the full horror and meaninglessness and unnecessary cruelty of it all and not having an answer. It is a horrifying level of awareness to say that I could cobble it all together after 5 years of just to get back to baseline, after being betrayed, lied to, set up to fail in so many ways, after then being betrayed by the government, and then this and then that. And then, meanwhile, that's happening across the country, and, countless lives are just being turned into wastelands of suffering and mediocrity for the sheer cruelty of mindlessly reiterating the status quo. This is the cruelty of ego, the cruelty of government, the cruelty of family. To mindlessly go through and maintain the identity, the pattern of thinking, feeling, that kills so many people, right? And that resists the changes that would redeem a culture, that would lead to growth, lead to evolution, lead to more well-being, right? The mindlessness of our medical, our medical bureaucracy, of our, quote, our legal system, that is supposed to be just, but is instead very possibly worse than no justice system at all, right? If all the money, trillions of dollars, spent locking people up was instead spent on vastly superior education, the country might be in a better place, certainly a wealthier place, right? But, these are the things you have to think about if you do not rely on a blind trust that it's all just going according to plan, and that this is the best plan that could be come up with, right? And that's why God came up with it, right? So, but if you don't comfort yourself with this is the way it is because that's the way it is, and that's the way it is because that's the way it should be, and it should be that because it's all part of the divine plan, then your ego, your I, has to figure out a better way of doing things. And that is not an automatic thing, but it usually should begin with some studying and with minimizing risk. Like, what are the risks? Am I going to die tomorrow from this and this? What can I do to minimize the risks of immediate death? What can I do to increase my security, the probability? I mean, I'm alive, but can I increase the probability that I'll be alive in a week, in a year, right? What can I do around that? And that depends on the situation. It depends if it's a emotional, relational trauma. My whole life was being built, the whole identity was built around this person, and they just left. My reason has left. My reason for existing has left. 90% of why I do things has left because I was doing it all for them, all for our future, and it's just left. The person I loved left, right? So these are all crises. Now, let's look at, the eye is still there. It will be absolutely panicked if it has been traumatized repeatedly or has PTSD and doesn't know what to do, what to say, what to make things better. Absolutely terrified, right? So there are, the first thing to do is anything that you have reasonable certainty will help your survival and security of survival. Do that, right? Eating, sleeping, drinking water, getting electrolytes, taking vitamin D, do it. Paying your bill before you're evicted, all that. Do it. Do those things. Make a list of those things if you're able to. Give that list to someone else to do if you're able to. Do anything that you can do, or delegate anything that you can delegate that will increase your odds of survival and being secure in survival. Now, in romantic and psychological trauma, the thing that you need more than anything else is love and belonging. So if you have a therapist with any modicum of empathy, love, and belonging, that they're stable in an economic, if you have the money to pay them, of course, right? If you have one person who actually really looks out for you and will be there for you, who will show up and be present for you, find that person, spend time with that person, try to create that person, try to create that group. So do those things, find those people. If people are too insensitive, etc., find a place, right? Maybe there's a spa, maybe there's a hotel somewhere in the world, right? Where, and it is in a capitalist, sociopathic cult, having money is a huge boost, right? Because so many people will do what you ask them to do, that you need them to do, if you have money, and will not, no matter how much pain you're in, if you do not. This is the brunt of the fist, right, of the sociopathic cult. I'm in desperate pain. I desperately need things. But people don't care about what I need. They care about their greed. They care about their survival, their security. And so when you're really down, you often don't have a lot to help other people survive and feel secure. So then you're depending on the percentage of the population that have space for pity or empathy, or that don't, they're annoyed by it, but they have a dictate, they have a doctrine that says do the right thing, even if you don't want to, because that's the thing. And unfortunately, as religions have declined in fear, right? Fear God, basically do what God says because he'll punish you otherwise, or do the right thing because the government will punish you, or do the right thing or your parents will beat you. The fear of the authority figure has collapsed a lot, but people are still fear-based. And so a lot more sociopathic behavior is happening because people are not afraid of God. And they were never doing it out of great joy in helping a stranger. They were doing it because That's the thing we're supposed to do, otherwise we'll go to hell, right? So the fear of the authority figure punishing them, which is a sociopathic God and a sociopathic paradigm. But if there is a big force that will punish you if you don't help the needy, then you may help the needy because you're afraid of being punished. And so, but that religious fear is declining. And yet the sociopathic paradigm of fear is not. And so there is a lot more, like, in China, there was a video recently of a baby falling under a car, being run over again and again, and like 1,000 people walk by with nobody interested in helping the baby or doing anything other than just get on, right? Because there would be no repercussion. No one would go to jail for not helping that baby. And everyone's desire to do something that they wanted to do was more important to them than the life of an innocent child, right? So that's sociopathic in the extreme, right? When an innocent child is not worth 5 cents for 1,000 people, that's the reptilian protocol right there. What would that child have to give, right? Particularly a poor, and would a sociopathic parent even be happy that they, maybe they'll be pleased that they don't have to feed a child, right? So it's that's the territory that we're in, and that is terrifying to be in. It is a very vulnerable state when you recognize the degree of sociopathic behavior and protocols all around us, and that we're in a vulnerable state where we can't necessarily be of use to other people in that moment. And in an expedient short-term thinking, right? You look at investment companies, and there's all these companies that could be tremendously useful for the culture in 10 years, but nobody will invest in them because they want money that quarter, right? Well, that's the territory that we're in. Short-term profits at the expense of long-term ethics, vision, empathy, etc. That is a very frightening and lonely place to be in a traumatized state. But you can nonetheless find, maybe 1 in 3 at least have some sympathy, right? They may not do much, but maybe they'll give you a smile. Maybe they, so it's the empathy is there. It's just a secondary operating system. Generosity is there. It is a secondary operating system. The primary operating system is survival and security, competition. If you're no good to me, I have no interest in you, right? So that's the thing to overcome. That's the thing to understand. That's the thing to be aware of and start building, right? So obviously, if you can increase your use to people, do those things, right? Try and do it with halfway decent people and in a way that does not decrease your use to yourself. But if you can increase your use to others, then even self-centered, narcissistic, and sociopathic others may be willing to give you something in exchange that helps you survive, right? That's pretty much the basis of capitalism. So think about how you could be useful. Okay, I lost my legs. I can no longer play football. So there isn't a single, like last month, all the leagues would have paid me millions to play football for them because I had good legs. Now they will not even give me a penny. They won't even take my call because they know I can't be useful to them. So I've lost all of my value in my familiar field. But in 10 years, I could be a great painter. Not much comfort in that right now, right? But I can still paint. I can still write a book. Right? Without any legs, I could do an audio video presentation like this. I could be a therapist, right? But the thing is, can I be useful to the majority of people that will only engage if I can give them something that they want better than anyone else can give them the same thing. Right? So can I be useful? And, you know, are there any groups that can help me? What nonprofits, etc.? Research that. Who could help me with this? Who could help me with that? Who could help me with this other thing? Who could I ask to help me? Now, that's kind of all in the area of securing resources to help your ego, your body survive. Now, you also need a routine. So this is another dimension. So you need a routine. You need sleep times, whatever. So you're not in a position to be picky usually after a major trauma. If you are, great. Pick a routine that is best for you, right? A routine is a circle, a cycle, a pattern. Give yourself a routine. Waking, sleeping, eating. Waking, sleeping, eating, bathing, right? So get those things in a cycle. Waking, sleeping, eating, bathing. Waking, sleeping, eating, bathing. Why? Because your ego is looking for certainty. So give it certainty. You know, waking, sleeping, eating, and bathing. That's the first one. Develop a cycle. Use a clock to set a rhythm. Right? Your ego will start feeling comforted by the routine. So now you've got those basic things in a routine. What about adding some other things that could help if you have the ability and time? What about meditation? This can take some of the pressure of the ego off. Well, I can't meditate. I'm in massive amounts of pain. Okay, what about guided meditation? I hate this fucking guy telling me to be grateful. Okay, another guided meditation. I hate this, idiot. Okay, another guided meditation. Or, if not guided meditation, what about turning on a YouTube video of nature and a waterfall? Could you sleep if you hear a waterfall and nature? Now, if you do open your eyes, what's happening? You see a beautiful bit of scenery. If you close your eyes, you hear the waterfall. Could you do that? And can you build it into your routine? Right? Can you build that into a routine? Now, then are there foods that help you feel grounded, healthy, better than not? Are there? And can you get them? If so, get them. If not, do the best you can. There's an infinite continuum of excellence and optimum, right? So you just want to think about it and evaluate the best options. If you're injured, can you start rehabilitating? Can you do it 1 minute? Okay, do it a minute. 1 minute a day, okay? Do it a minute a day. After a week, can you do 2 minutes a day? 3 minutes a day? Build the routine in a direction of recovery. You lost all your money. You were a billionaire. Now you owe someone $300 million. Right? It's not a good starting point. Can you set aside $1 a day in your IRA? Right? It's obviously not going to do much for now, but $1 a day. I'm going to transfer $1 a day. And what am I doing? I'm building a future. Building a future is incredibly important, which requires investments of time, money, energy, thought. Opening up the possibility field. So spend a little bit of time making it more likely that things are going to get better. So can I read a little bit of a day? No, I can't read. My eyes are hurting and I'm scattered. Okay, can I listen to an audiobook? No, I don't have any. Okay, can I buy one? No, I don't have a phone. Can I get a phone, right? Expand the possibility field, expand the probability field step by step in a way that is reliable. Can I secure my passwords better so that they're not stolen? Can I have a backup plan? So I have someone who's helping me, but if they don't show up, I have nowhere to go. Okay, is there anyone that could be a backup? what's my backup plan? Can I create a backup plan? So creating futures is part of creating stability. You create a backup plan of, if this and this and this happens, I'll do this. Worst case scenario, I'll take all my credit cards, blow a load, go over here, and I'll live for 3 months, and then I'll kill myself in my own way and at peace. Okay, that's the worst case scenario now. We've got a reasonable backup plan. Dying well, having some peace, some time to write and put things in order, maybe write a will, etc. And credit card debt isn't a very big problem if you're dead. So that's the plan, right? That's the backup plan. If it all comes, if it all this and that and the other, and nobody pays me my loans back and all this, and nobody helps me, and this job doesn't come through, then this is what I'll do, right? So create a stable backup plan that is worth, that works, right? And then have that as the worst case, then create a better one, right? If it doesn't come to that, I could do this. If that doesn't work, I could do this, and slowly work towards a better plan and doing the things that make certain plans real, taking action, making decisions, asking for help with this, getting actual things done. As you do that, the ego will calm down. The ego will start to feel like I'm in identity that works. Wake up this time, I do this, I watch this show, I do this. You build identity. You build a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that focuses on certainty. And then you iterate to make the certainty a little bit better, a little bit better. And that's the plan, right? Now, you can also, this is, can be potentially a great time to build a stronger identity. Once you've got a basic routine and stuff, you can re-examine things. You can be critical of the culture around you and start creating a more ideal world. So this is the movement from a traumatized, disruptive identity into a coping identity. And from there, you can, the safety of that, you can start criticizing the status quo and using it as a springboard to create a better vision. Like, there's no dogs allowed in my hotel room. If I could just hold a dog, I would feel so much more relaxed, but nobody's renting dogs. Okay, we need a place for people to go with trauma with dogs to rent. Okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to create, once I recover and all that, I'm going to create a space that helps other trauma survivors. There's going to be dogs in hotels. Maybe I'll create a chain, the trauma hotel network. If you are insecure, this, that, the other, all of our staff has been trained in PTSD. There are dogs, there are rabbits, there are massages by calm people. There is a meditation space. Why the fuck is nobody doing this? The Trauma Hotel Network. Well, it's one of thousands of things that the world needs and doesn't have, and it's one reason you exist, right? To discover through the antipathy, the discovery of the flawed nature of what is, to create something better. That's how evolution works. You experience something, it's dreadful, you don't want to stand for it, so you do something better. Someone else experiences that and sees all the flaws in that and does it again, right? And that's called iteration in a positive direction. So there's going to be a meditation room. There's going to be this. There's going to be that. So you start thinking about it, right? Can I save up for that? I don't know. Will I be able to raise the money? I don't know. But let me establish an idea with no time pressure or anything of what the world should be moving towards. So dogs available for rent. Trained dogs, right? If the hotel is providing the trained dogs, they don't have to worry about them fighting. They can weed those out. They don't have to worry about crapping all and destroying the sheets and all that because they can train them to behave well in every room, right? And the people coming don't have to worry about being bitten because, again, training. Now the hotel has a unique, a unique asset, right? The healing hotel. Why? Because Western people don't like acknowledging the horrific state of so many things. Well, that seems negative, right? So the healing hotel, rather than I don't want to be seen going at the trauma hotel, I would rather die of miserable suicide and depression than have anyone know that I had any problems, because I'm a shame-based person, and that's fine, but I don't want anyone to know. Okay, you live in a fucked up cult where appearance matters. Okay, the healing hotel, right? The healing hotel. And so I'm going to have dogs. I'm going to have aromatherapy. So wouldn't it be fun, right, to go to the healing hotel? There are 8 essential oils and a diffuser in every room. There are pastel colors. There's complete silence. No one slamming the door and housekeeping, hello, 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 hello. Oh, you're in. Amazing. No, none of that. You call or alert, this and have some peace, right? And you don't hear the slam and the this and that. Nobody rings you. Are you coming down for breakfast? No. Thanks for waking me up. I actually got to sleep at 4 a.m. after worrying about all my trauma, but nice of you to be so concerned about this, or I have to unplug the fucking telephone just to have a good night's sleep, right? So the healing hotel, where the phone doesn't ring, a nice light dings, right? And you can answer it or not. Well, there's an idea. The volume is low, not screaming, we need your urgent attention right now, whatever you're doing. The dogs, the rabbits are trained. The healing hotel, right? What an idea. Diffusers, comfortable bedding. There's a thought, and relaxing. Let's not get you hyped up on corn syrup. Let's have some, 5 or 6 tea blends in every room, and no coffee. How about that, right? So, and how about whole organic snack bars, everything included, so you don't have to wonder, if you're going to 10x your bill by having a few snacks. How about that, right? And people chosen the healing hotel, right? So I'm going to do this. So it's going to have this, and it's going to have that, and it's going to have this. So you write it down. You create a version of the future that's worth living for, and that makes the world a better place because of what you've learned, and because of what you hate, and because of what you desire. You hate the cruelty and the stupidity and the ignorance and the blind thing and the just sheer constant monotony of mediocrity. You hate it. Great. Write it down. This is fucked. 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 Okay. That's the first step. And then what wouldn't be fucked? What would be 50% less fucked as a starting point, right? And then what would the ideal be? And is it possible? Is it possible that the healing hotel as a chain around the world might become the #1 booked hotel in the world? Of course it is, right? Of course it is. Who the fuck wouldn't want to spend time in a quiet place with dogs, even if nothing's going wrong? Right? I would. You would. So it is possible, right? So what if people stole my idea? Who cares? Then it's much easier to go to a hotel than it is to start one. All the better. A bunch of people steal your idea, and then you've got options and competition, and the prices won't be so high. So you build positive futures as part of this identity building. You build positive futures, and then you start thinking about the path, the steps that you could take in that direction. Well, I don't have any money. Okay, can you write about it? Could you start a blog about it? I don't know how to write. Okay, can you talk about it? You have a phone, press record. Can you do an audio recording about it? Could you listen to other people who can talk about it? Can you mention it to the nurses in the hospital, right? What about this? What about that? Can you learn about, now you've got a purpose. You've got a mission to make a more beautiful world that responds to the ugliness that you've experienced. Now you are part of life. All life is, right? Once upon a time, there was slime. The slime wasn't satisfied being slime, so it had sex with itself, produced a bunch of possibilities. Some of them lived. Some of them grew and iterated. Life keeps making a better version of life. And you've got a conscious mind and an imagination that 99.9% of all life doesn't have. In other words, you're part of the 1%. In all of the horror, in all of the trauma, in all of the grief, you're still part of the 1%. The 1% that can feel grief. 99% of life cannot. Cut a tree down next to another tree, there's no grief. You can feel grief. You can be angry at waste, and you can do something about it. I can just do a tiny bit, okay? Do a tiny bit. But create certainty around it. Create certainty and build up a positive future. Number one, and then start taking steps that make it more probable. Not certain, but certainly more probable. There is a 1% chance that I will recover enough, be good enough to do that. 1%, okay? That's the probability right now. What would you have to do to make it 3% probable? Well, probably if I read 3 books on how the best hotels are run. What's the probability I can do that? Well, it's pretty obvious. There's a free app called Audible. Danny Myers, Hospitality, Setting the Table. Let's start with him. He's winning all kinds of awards for making people feel welcome. That's what I want people to feel, okay? $10, is that doable? Right. How about panhandling for books? Could you buy an Audible book for me and share it with me? Could you buy this book for me, please? I want to become an entrepreneur, right? I need to learn sales. Let's become a panhandler. You have to be really good at sales to get anyone to give you some money on the street, right? So figure it out, right? I'm just a bum. No, I'm a training salesperson, right? By the time I get my hotel in the next 10 years, I will know how to solicit, charity, gifts, sales from just about anyone, right? And I will be immune to all their insults because I'll have experienced the worst of it already. It's easy to run a hotel after being rejected on the street and cursed on the street for 5 years. I mean, running a hotel, dealing with an irate customer because their pillow isn't the right way, easy, right? Easy after that. So what increases the probability field? Step by step by step. Now, you don't commit your identity because that's fragile. Your identity wants something solid. No, I am a victim in here and this and that and the other. I'm going to deal with that. And I'm going to start dreaming of a better identity. And I'm not going to commit to it until it maybe becomes 75% probable. But I'm going to take steps every day that moves it from 0% likely to 10% likely. And then 10% likely to 15% or 20% likely, right? And I'm going to keep moving that in ways. A good way to set up this type of thing is to win while losing. Meaning if you get a gig where you win while losing, you've got certainty. So here's a good example, right? For years I've been making these videos and nobody watches them. One person here, maybe 5 people there, 100 people there, but nobody watches these videos. I have 0 invested in the certainty that anyone is going to watch these videos. That's an iffy thing, right? People don't like long-form content. This is long-form content, right? People have short attention spans. This is long, right? That's an iffy thing. But I'm winning while losing, right? The goal is not to make money on YouTube. First of all, the one or two people that watch something from time to time write and say it was helpful. So that's winning. One person was helped, that's winning, right? So that's winning while losing, you know, in the algorithm and all that. What's the other thing? I learned to talk. How do you learn to talk? You talk a lot, okay? As a trauma survivor with no one fitting into my orbit to talk about these things with, how do I get to talk about things that nobody I know wants to talk about? How? Well, talk to a camera, right? So I'm getting good at talking while failing to, you know, create a massive impact, whatever. So I'm winning while failing. You can do that too. If you pick the right goals and you understand that your most valuable asset is your skill and your ability, then if you set up a scenario where if you win, you win, and if you fail, you win. Like what would be winning? Well, winning would be, you know, if this was winning, there would be trauma educators who learn things from this and then take it out into the world. There'd be people wanting to co-write a book. There would be publishing offers. There would be hundreds of thousands of people learning about trauma. There would be interviews. There would be people offering lots of money. There would be, you know, all kinds of things like that. So that could be kind of the peak winning scenario. Right? That's very, very, very unlikely, 1% likely. But that's not something you can invest deeply in with 1% odds. The ego hates that kind of uncertainty, particularly if you're traumatized. But what about the certainty that you're going to get better talking every single time that you talk? What about iterating the equipment, right? So this is like 5th generation equipment, right? First started holding my phone on my pillow, and that was the first video, right? This is the 2000th video, right? So it's got 5 iterations in equipment, but a steady iteration in talking, right? So that's certain. It is absolutely certain that after finishing this talk, I will be able to talk about these subjects more coherently on the fly in an elevator. Could be useful. But what if it isn't? What if nobody's interested in trauma in a traumatically illiterate culture for my whole lifetime, which, you know, countries have been denying PTSD and trauma for hundreds of years. Then why not a few more? Well, learning to present one thing well is a skill of presenting that you can then apply to something else, right? What if my neighbor wanders up with a traumatized child one day, and I know a lot about trauma from spending 5 years making videos about it? Could be useful, right? So I'm becoming more trauma literate, a better speaker, a better thinker, while playing a 1% chance that other good things will happen, right? So I'm winning while I'm losing because none of those things are happening. But I'm getting a little better, a little better, a little better about the area that I think is one of the most important things in the world. So I'm also winning by answering the anger. Why isn't this taught in school? Why did nobody tell me this? Why did no one respond in a way that could have prevented this? Why? Well, the answer is nobody gave a shit enough to do this. Okay, what's the answer to that? Give a shit and do this, right? So you can win while losing. And if you can set it up that way, you can give yourself the certainty of the certain win and ignore the uncertainty of the 1% chance win, etc. And of course, if you take 5 or 10 years to get good at something, the odds of something happening may go from 1% to 3%. That the upside will happen, right? For you, it would go from 1% to 3%, or it might go from 0.01% to 1%, right? And as long as you're happy with the win while losing, you can't lose, right? As long as you love creating the painting, you've won whether or not anyone buys it, is I guess another way of saying. So that's I think, a good safety protocol. And I think in summation, what I would say is you want to build up a flexible and resilient ego, which means, and we all have the I, but you want identity, a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that can do a couple of things. You want to run to avoid fights you don't need to have. Run, particularly when they're fights with large governments and laws and things like that, that you're going to be the one going flying, even if you're right. So run from big patterns of energy that you can't win with. Dodge them, hide, lie, run, do what you need to do to not get knocked off a positive course simply because they're bigger than you. Learn to run. Learn to hide, right? We're going to da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da because of this and this and this and this, the other. You don't agree with it. It's bigger than you. You can't win. Learn to hide, right? So learn to hide. Now, this is important because, I had a pretty righteous, do the right thing identity, which is one of the reasons I got so beaten up, right? I've never lied to a friend. I've never lied to a partner. Never cheated on a partner. Tend to obey every law. Right? But when I hit up against a large object that was bigger than me, that was doing the wrong thing, I lost simply because it was bigger. And I lost again, and I lost again, and I lost again. Was betrayed again, broken again, and again, and again, and again. And I didn't have any part in me that knew how to run from the wrong thing. I thought if it's right, you just do it, right? But you need an ego that can assess how sociopathic or empathic what you're dealing with is. It doesn't matter what it says on the brochure, right? My brochure was the Human Awareness Institute, committed to creating a world where everyone wins. It's a beautiful brochure, a beautiful mission statement. But you need to assess the behavior, right? Like 12% of therapists sexually abuse their patients, but no therapist in 30 has ever told me that fact. 100 people in my life have recommended therapy. None of them pointed that out, right? So so why has no therapist said, hey, we all need to talk about this, the 12% of us that sexually abuse our clients, and admit it, not the ones that do it and don't admit it. Well, why isn't that talked about? Well, it's good for the client, but it's bad for making money if you're a therapist, right? And why don't friends tell it? Because it's expedient to just say, well, generally it's a good idea, and all those horror things that happen from time to time, well, if they happen, you deal with it. I won't. I will have saved time not bringing it up, and I can pretend I'm doing the right thing and just not do that, right? Why doesn't the government mention it? Well, Lots of dumb things the government doesn't do. So, when I ended up being sexually abused by a therapist under the influence of psychedelics, I didn't see it coming, right? Nor did I see being silenced, nor did I see being cast out of the community for the audacity of telling the truth, right? I didn't know there could be organizations with a mission statement of healing ignorance and fear and stuff who were terrified and wanted everyone to remain ignorant, right? And those are, of course, that's where naivete needs to be crushed. Because it's not an effective enough model for dealing with the complexities of hate, rage, love, stupidity, kindness, and cruelty all in the same person to look at brochures. It's not a good enough model, right? So how do you see the buried landmines that you don't know, right? That was my big thing, realizing, I picked these fools. So I don't have a good enough model. So how do I develop one? Well, that takes years to really understand why and how people are doing what they're doing, right? But you've got to be able to run. You've got to be able to hide. You've got to be able to fight. Some people are good at running and hiding, but they won't fight even if they're the biggest object. They won't fight. You've got to learn how to fight, right? Take some martial art courses so you learn it in your body, right? You got to learn how to fight, flee, and run in the presence of large, unfriendly objects. Right? You've got to assess what's going to happen with the collision, and you've got to deal with trauma survival as a very important thing to grasp and deal with. You've got to be able to do that. You've also got to be able to, have a model for understanding why is it there? Is the world evil? Is there no purpose in life at all? Is the world out to get me? These are not useful models. But understanding the hierarchy of needs that different people have, understanding the four brains in their operating system, understanding the shadow side in you and in each person, those are good things to understand and provide a working model for exploring. So you're going to need a more resilient, more intelligent, you're going to need to grow up. You're going to need to be an adult, which is a huge crisis in a cult that produces children and adolescents in grown-up bodies, but doesn't produce a lot of adults, right? You're going to need to learn to become an adult. It's a very shocking experience. I'm still not an adult, just to be clear, but let's say that I've covered 40% of the territory. Let's say I'm a 40% of an adult. So 40% of the time, I'm a pretty good adult, or throughout my life, I'm a 40% adult. So it's, and that is unfortunately a little bit above average, right? So, there's no reason to expect your parents to be an adult in this culture, or your government, or anything else, right? Hypocrisy, lies, betrayal, irresponsibility, blaming other people, that's not adult behavior. Criticizing things and not doing anything about it, that's adolescence, right? Expecting other people to take care of you when they obviously don't know how, that's a child, right? But we don't even know this landscape, right? So it's shocking, right? So we need to learn these different postures. We need to learn to become an adult. We need to learn to develop an adult identity. We need to learn to heal and love and understand our traumatized identity and transition. We need to understand what identity is. We need to meet our self, which is not the I. The self is the witness. You only experience that in psychedelics or in meditation or in breathing meditation. You will discover there's a part of you that you cannot put into words that is not the I, that is bigger than the I, and that witnesses all that is there, the witness. That's the self. The self cannot be destroyed. So if you get in touch with the self, something many people have never done in their entire life. Most people do not know there is a difference between the self and the ego. And even if they do in theory, they've never met their self. And even if they've met themselves, it's just from time to time they've forgotten all about it, right? So it's a pretty big deal to be able to meet yourself, right? Because it's the field around the ego. And the essential part of being able to meet the self is timeless, spaceless, eternal. You can connect with the self regardless of your I, your identity. And your self doesn't judge you, doesn't dissociate. Your self isn't racist, isn't sexist. It isn't even in language. So it cannot be taken away. You can lose touch with it, but you can be firmly connected with yourself living on the street as an addict. Right? Less likely you would be an addict if you're really firmly in touch with yourself, but you can, live in a sewer, for example, and be connected with yourself. Or you can live in a mansion and be paranoid and only know your ego. But the ego is always fragile because it will end with death. It ends with every relationship. It's radically changed. The ego is constantly traumatized. Self is not, right? And so if you can build a bridge to yourself and maintain the relationship, your ego can be less paranoid. You can be less paranoid because you're not fully identified with the ego. It can be a little bit more of a game, a little bit more of a performance, which is what the ego is. So these are kind of iterations and movements towards rebuilding a stronger identity, a stronger ego, and then taking some of the weight off the ego with the self to know that there is something bigger than the ego, and learning a better operating system, a better way of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that can avoid many traumas, fight and win some traumas when necessary. If you've got the legal standing and you've got some money to sue someone, you may be able to hold up. And the torment of the legal system could be better, all things considered, than just capitulating all the time. So I'll leave you with that.